coming. We'll get started now, I guess. Yeah, so tonight we'll talk about can you still cash flow in the Calgary market? So before we get into that, we are the organizers, Anthony, Santhosh, and Layne. Santhosh and I are realtors with Calgary Real Estate Investor Hub, and Layne's a mortgage broker, investor focused. And we do these events every month. So quick real estate market update. So the market's starting to shift a little bit, and we can see that from the April update. So year over year, we've got a slight price drop. Now we have a breakdown of different property types after, and you'll see that this price drop is not happening in all property types. So 1.4% year over year drop on the benchmark price. Days on market are going up as well. Months of inventory are going up. The sold listing are going down, right? So you can see the story of what we're getting into. But detached and semi-detached are still doing really good. And we see that day to day, Santhosh and I, when we go around. There's still some bidding wars happening even, and if it's priced really well. And we can see that the benchmark price is actually up a little bit. Now, that again is across the whole city. There's definitely pockets of semi-detached and detached that are also going down a little bit in prices, especially in the suburbs, some of the new build and some of the price points. But as a whole, it's still performing pretty well from that perspective. The sold listings are still down a little bit. Months of inventory have been going up as well. Average days of market have been going up, but the prices are still resilient for now in those product types. And again, it's very dependent on the specifics. However, in the townhouse and apartment, we see it's a slightly different story. Now, you're going to find this chart confusing because if I go back, it's up on all of the property types, but then the total one is down. And this is just the way that CREB calculates kind of the aggregate of all the properties. You can end up with some funky statistics like that. However, I would say that in our direct experience, in the apartment space especially, the prices are generally down. And we've seen that like from same identical units selling last year and selling this year. They're definitely taking a lot longer, and there's a lot more options out there in those product types. So rental market, given we're going to talk about cash flow, I thought it was important to do a quick update on the rental market. I'm going to admit I'm not a huge fan of rental.ca as a source of stats because they don't actually have a lot of the rental properties in our market. Rent Faster, Facebook, etc. has more of the inventory, but they provide national statistics that are typically a bit better than some of the other sites that are not as national in nature. And we can see that pretty much everywhere other than Halifax is down year over year. And Calgary is notably down by a bigger margin, right? 10%, this is also very general across the city. There are pockets that are down more than that. There are pockets that have been a bit more resilient. It's 10% on average. We've definitely seen with our own rental, the leases that we are renewing where we have to go back on market and get market rent again, we're definitely down. On average for us, about 10% is what we're seeing too. And as you can see, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom are similar as well in terms of drop. They have kind of breakdown here. So we wanted to start with that because as we talk about cash flow again, that's going to be a bit of a hurdle because the rents are down. However, this is not the mortgage rate per se, but this is the two main drivers of mortgage rates. So the bond yield, 5 years, and the policy interest rate, right, that the Bank of Canada sets. So these are usually related to fixed term, and these are related to variable mortgages, variable rates. And in both cases, we're down. And Layne can talk about specifics of rates, but rates are better on average now than they were last year. So rents are down, but your mortgage payments are also usually down, especially if you're buying a new property. If you're renewing from 4 or 5 years ago, you're probably still up, but that's a different story. I'll hand it off to Layne, actually. He's going to talk to us a bit more about cash flow in Calgary, and you can probably put some more comments on there too.
Yeah, it's funny, I'm a mortgage broker, but the last thing I like to talk about is rates, just because from a long-term perspective, rates aren't something that you should focus on. It almost distracts. It's almost like trying to time a market. If you're looking to buy a rental property and you have a 15, 20-year time horizon for a rental portfolio, what the rate is today really just doesn't matter that much. So I tend not to talk a lot about rates, but it is something that's relevant. It's certainly relevant to cash flow as well. Where do I think rates are going? That's tough to say. I think most economists have been saying, and they've been saying this for a year and a half, that rates are going to come down another 0.5 point from where they are now. That's on the Bank of Canada variable rate side. The bond yield based is what I would consider at its natural bottom, but I don't think it's going to remain there, because I think that the federal government, especially this current federal government, the new prime minister is a former central banker and an investment banker, more importantly. Investment bankers love inflation. It is great for their own net worth. It is great for GDP. It makes everything look good. The problem with inflation for any government is that eventually people on the lower rungs of society end up having to pay more for things. So obviously that starts impacting them politically. But governments love inflation because that's how they pay off their debt. They inflate it away instead of paying it off. But now this new government, who obviously is inclined from an investment banking background, is inclined to want inflation, now has an excuse for the bad part of inflation, because it's Donald Trump's fault. So when prices of everything go up due to inflationary policies, there's a scapegoat now. So they can say, hey, the stock market's doing great, the GDP's up, and that's all inflation driven. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're doing better, but the numbers look really good. And of course, investment bankers are actually making a lot of money, and people with big stock portfolios are making a lot of money. But the smaller people paying the higher price for groceries that really impact them, that's not their fault. So they'll take credit for all the good things that inflationary policies will do, and then they can offload the detriment of those same policies to Donald Trump's tariffs. So I actually am kind of more confident that we're going to head into inflation, and it's because the government, if they print 30% more money, for example, is effectively paying off 30% of their debt, because that 30% more money they printed, representing the same amount of goods and services, is actually just devaluing money. So it devalues their debt, and that the way that actually manifests in day-to-day kind of finances is the fact that when you go and pay GST, it's now 30% more that we all pay in GST to buy the same amount of things. We've all hit another new income tax bracket because our incomes eventually go up. Capital gains go up. So the government gets more and more revenue from devaluing money. So it's like their way of raising taxes without actually having to raise taxes. So governments love inflation. All governments ever have, right to the point where they go bankrupt. Look at South America's history. Every government has always liked inflation, right up until the point where they get in trouble for it. But I just think that our current government's going to need to save the Ontario real estate market, as well as they're just going to make all the GDP numbers and everything look really good. So that bodes well for real estate, because while the government is paying off their own debt, if you buy an asset with leverage, your debt gets paid off too. It manifests itself as inflation, but it's ultimately a good thing. Got off on a tangent there. I'm still talking about rates, but why that's important is I think that the natural bottom of interest rates is probably where we're at for a bond yield, and that's what investors would do. I have a feeling that the government is, and this is even prior to Trump's tariff announcement, I think that the government is going to be required to participate in the bond market again by something called quantitative easing. And it effectively works out. An easy way to look at it as they're printing money. That's not exactly what's happening, but it's basically what ends up happening. So I think that we're in for inflationary times, and I think if you own real estate that's leveraged, that can be good for you. Now, that you also do have to watch your cash flow, because everything doesn't go up at exactly the same pace at the same time. So when is cash flow the only important thing to worry about? Right? It's when you don't have it. And if you bank on inflation and you buy a whole bunch of properties that are negative cash flow, and then something happens in the market and you get, and cash flow even gets worse, and you don't have a lot of cash, or you don't have significant income that can just cover that cash flow, then you can end up in a lot of trouble. You end up having to sell your properties at the worst time, So you end up being forced to sell your properties because you can't manage the negative cash flow, and then you're also doing so at a bad time to sell. So you always want to make sure that your cash flow is managed, but there's a few different ways that to manage that. So I've got a portfolio split, I'd call it probably equally between properties that are really good cash flow properties and then properties that are bunched together for future developments. And both of those report now that my bunch together for future developments are in nicer neighborhoods where the rents aren't necessarily better, but my future development is likely going to make me a lot more money. So over, from 2015, 16, 17, 18, I wish that all I had was cash flow properties because they were all doing really well. And some of my other properties were actually negative cash flow, a few $100s a month, some of them even $500 a month. Now, my aggregate portfolio is still cash flowing, so I'm fine. But 21, 22, 23, I wish I only owned properties in good neighborhoods like Killarney, Marda Loop, where property values went up $200,000 and my other properties went up $100,000. So I have a kind of a balanced portfolio. The other thing that a lot of people look at is, well, if I'm only buying one or two properties and I also have good income, I can handle negative cash flow. So I have a couple, they make about, both in oil and gas, one's an accountant, so in and out of oil and gas, but they make $350,000 together and they don't care about cash flow. If they got to feed properties $500, $600, $700 a month, they don't care. They're like, oh, we give $15,000 a month to our financial planner. Now we want to invest in real estate to diversify. We're okay if we have to put a few hundred, or a few $1,000s per month. That's part of our investment. So they're okay doing that. They actually want the better appreciation and upside. So they're okay buying negative cash flow properties. They consider that the same as giving money to their financial planner on a monthly basis. They can handle it because their relatively evenly split incomes are sufficient so that if cash flow got worse, they could still handle that negative cash flow. So it doesn't matter as much as someone with either a lot of assets or cash flow from another source. And it's, again, just two different aspects to cash flow, whether you're looking for appreciation or cash flow or a combination of those. So the one thing that I like to focus on with real estate investing is long-term. And anything under 5 years, I don't even consider investing. I would consider that speculating, or possibly if you're flipping, I would almost consider that more of a business in construction, possibly. But I don't think it's investing. I think it's a business, and it's not necessarily a bad one, but it's not a form of investment. It is, you're actually actively, and I mean, technically the government sees it the same way. It's active income if you're flipping properties and you get taxed the same way. It's not a passive income that you make money from that you eventually have a capital gain on if you sell. So everything I look at is I want to own for forever, basically. But it's like my minimum time frame is 15 to 20 years. Like I look at everything as if I'm going to have to own it for 15 or 20 years. And I've sold very few properties, so most properties I do own for a long term. My focus is never on trying to time the market because I've never been able to. Nice. I've only ever flipped one property, and I've got 20 plus, plus long-term properties, some that I have sold. So I have 17 now, and everything I do is long-term. So I only focus on buying the best properties. So some of the best properties that I have, my one best property, I overpaid for it in a terrible time. Yeah. So I couldn't have timed it possibly worth. I bought the subsequent 15 years were the worst place to have owned real estate, which is Calgary in North America from 2007 to 2022. It was basically we had 0% increase in price. That doesn't even count inflation. So we actually technically lost value. However, if I could buy every property at that overpriced price, I'd have a portfolio only full of that property because it is my best performing property by far. It's got 2 garages, really easy to rent, great parking, just everything about that property works. It's a great rental property. I never have, just the location is good. So I would love to just build that portfolio. So the idea is to pick the timing, try and time rates, try and time when the market's going to turn, is just to buy the right properties because that's more important than the extra $50 a month less in mortgage payment if I would have waited 8 months to try and buy it kind of after the market had dropped a little bit lower. So that might save me even if it's $30,000, $40,000 less than I would have paid for the property, it'd be very small in comparison to the upside I get from that property. So number one, impossible to time. Number two, even if I could, that property would be gone, so I'd buy the second best property. So focusing on buying the right property is far more important. So when is that hardest to do? Right so it's hardest to do when the market's going up like this, right? That's what everyone's excited about real estate. I mean, most of you either were directly involved or impacted, but if you wrote an offer a year ago, 18 months ago, 24 months ago, on even a reasonably good property, you had 10 other offers competing with you. And that was challenging. Hard to get a financing condition, which makes it challenging, hard to write, or you have to simply overpay if you're not in a position to write with no financing condition. If you couldn't get a home inspection sometimes, and sometimes you just couldn't get that perfect property because there'd be too many offers and somebody would be willing to overpay for it. So it's really hard during this time, and everyone seems to be comfortable. So if you buy here, everyone's comfortable. But this is what it actually becomes harder to buy, is when the but that's when it's actually easier to buy better properties. So you can buy better properties in the time. Now, nobody in their right mind actually believes that the real estate market goes up in this straight line. Nobody says, yes, real estate goes up like that. Everyone knows that the black line is more representative of what actually happens in a market over a 15 or 20 year time horizon. So if the idea is to buy really good cash flowing portfolio properties that you're going to own for 20 years, the reality is you just buy them when you're ready, and also when you find a good property. So if you find a good property here, well, you might have to overpay for it. If you find it here, maybe you can get a better deal. This is where I kind of argue we are. I don't think the prices are I think rents are dropping. I don't think the prices are going to drop as much as the rents are going to drop. But the rents were also short-lived. If you rented a property 2.5 years ago, and you haven't raised rent on your tenant, and you're re-renting it, you're probably going to be increasing rent. If you rented a property at the peak of last summer to the summer before that, you're going to be dropping rent to get it rented out. So that's just what's happening.
More options than these.
What's that?
There's starting to be more options than last year too.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to find the good properties because there are some available, and when they come available, you don't have 20 people necessarily. If it's a good property, there's still competing offers on good properties is the other thing that is happening. So this isn't to dissuade people from focusing on cash flow, because cash flow is important. You have to survive. You have to make it through. So unless you have either a cash cushion or a portfolio that's cash flow, you don't want to go accumulate a bunch of properties losing money. And there are still properties to cash flow, especially if that is your primary focus. You can find properties in neighborhoods cash flow. Santhosh is going to get into some details of properties that are listed now or that have sold recently that are still cash flowing. This is kind of just some anecdotal info about what's happening. We have kind of record construction right now. And so we have about 20,000 units, houses, whether it be apartment building or a house or a townhouse, under construction, multifamily being setting record pace right now. I mean, 20,000 currently under construction is already a record, but it's actually the multifamily. Now, the thing that's happening with multifamily is they take longer to build. So a house you can build in, 8, 9, 10 months, 12 months, whereas multifamily often take 18 months for a townhouse, maybe a little bit longer, depending on whether you're greenfield developing, meaning you're building on a new field with a builder, or you're tearing something down in an old neighborhood redoing. Take up to 2 to 2.5 years. So what's happening is we're seeing a lot of people who are tearing down houses to build 8plexes, and they're partway through that process, whether they bought the house, shut off the power, kicked out the tenants, they've started remediating the old asbestos siding off of it, and they realize, oh no, the numbers don't work anymore. But now what do? They kind of have to finish out the project. Or if they've torn the house down, well, now you've got a house with an $800,000 mortgage on it, or $800,000 worth of investment into it. You can't stop. You have to finish it now. Even if the numbers don't work, even if you have to sell at a loss, you still have to go and finish that project. So we're getting a lot of people, and I think that's what's contributing to this. I suspect we're going to see this number continue at these kind of record numbers, probably for a while, and it's going to keep the rental market flat. We do still have, and I know it's slowed down, this is the slowing down, this is Calgary, this is the slower version, but it's still 86,000 people moved here over the last 12 months. So that's not, I think it was over 100 at our peak, but that's still a pretty hefty amount. When you divide that by 20,000, that's actually 2.3 people per household, which is the exact number of the average amount of people per household. So currently, we are, according to the way they measure the statistics, we're actually building the exact right amount of houses for the amount of people coming here. I would argue that most people coming here are younger and have young families, whether they be international immigrants or people coming from other parts of the country to work. They don't live 2 people to a household or 1 person to a household. The guy across the street from me, 86 years old, lives in a big 5-bedroom house by himself. When that guy moves out, it's going to be a family of 5 that move in, or a family of 4 that move in, or it's going to be 2 families that move in, or a bunch of young people that move in. So I'd say we don't necessarily need 20,000 people for 86,000 based on the makeup of students moving here from across the country, or young tradespeople moving here are going to rent a house with some buddies or friends or a basement suite or something, and they're going to have roommates. So I would say that the 2.3 person household might be the correct makeup, but I don't think that's generally the people, the new immigrants that are coming, whether they be from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, aren't going to live 2.3 people to a household. And that is, so the population growth I think is still going to stay. The other thing that isn't included in this stat though is because we have a lot of brownfield development, which is the tearing down of an old house and building an 8-plex or a 4-plex or a duplex. Sure, you are adding 8 new units, but the developments that we're looking at right now, we're tearing down a couple of or a house with a basement suite. So we're actually we're building 8, but we're actually taking away 2. So some of these, because a lot of these are actual brownfield developments, some of these you have to negative off these are the ones under construction, or sorry, these are these 20,000 units. Some of these are houses that are actually being torn down as well. They're typically dense, like increasing density, but it isn't necessarily, those are 20,000 units under construction, but they might have had to tear 3,000 houses down in order to build those. So these numbers are really hard to track, and I don't think there's a perfect way of doing it. We've tried to actually find the data to try and compare how many units are being taken off, and we just can't find that data anywhere. Yeah. Population growth. Oh, just interesting information. If you haven't heard, sometime about 2.5 days ago, we officially crossed 5 million people in Alberta. Obviously an estimate, but there's an actual clock you could look up. It's a population clock. If you just look it up, it shows the per province population, and it kind of it takes an estimate and it'll update every couple of minutes. You'll see somebody move to Alberta, basically, either from internationally or across the country. So our population is still growing. When you have a younger population, it also tends to grow faster, just because younger families expand faster. So we have a younger population, still growing workforce, and different oil and gas is coming back, but it's certainly not what's been driving our economy. So I think there's still lots to be hopeful about, but we are probably talking about cash flow a little more than we were a year and a half to 2 years ago. So with that, I'll hand this off to Santhosh so he can show you all the cash flowing properties.
Okay, so before we get into the property examples, just wanted to do a very quick overview. What's cash flow? Most people already know this, but essentially income minus expenses, right? Expenses often on a lot of pro formas, especially prepared by listing realtors or presenting you a pro forma, and you're on the other side as a potential buyer. Often some of these things might be missing from the pro formas, so just be careful to account for all the expenses when you're trying to work out your cash flow. Now, we have a star next to these 2 things because, yes, by deducting all expenses, you get net cash flow, but your cash flow is not consistent every single month, right? Your repairs will fluctuate up and down. Capital expenditure items do come up from time to time. You might think your furnace is going to last 15 years, but it might die at 10, right? So then that's like a $5,000 repair right there. So then you're going to be in a worse off position for cash flow, and it's going to recover over time. So just remember that this number is not static every single month. Okay.
Yeah, because that's why we account for like
Yeah.
an allowance, right? We'll build up a reserve of repair and maintenance, but sometimes it's easy to get caught up with the idea that, okay, it's going to be $200 every month, but it's not really how it works out. Like it might be zero for 6 months and it might be 10 grand all at once, right? So just make sure you remember that.
Okay, so moving on, what typically works in the Calgary market is we're a huge fan of the suited bungalows and bi-levels, and the semi-detached especially work even better, especially from a cash flow perspective. Okay? A few other ones also do work, but with a star, right? So it depends on a case-by-case basis. Some freehold townhouses do work, depends on the price point. Townhomes with low condo fees could work. Multifamily, again, depends on the age of the property, or is it an older building, newer building, and purchase price, right? The cost of acquisition. So,
Yeah, multifamily, we put that star because 5+ unit is a cap rate valuation, as many people know in the room, like average cap rate being, in the high 5, low 6. It's hard to actually cash flow that with current rates. So usually you need to do substantial changes to that building to get it to a cash flow position, which is feasible, but that's a star, right? Same thing with 2-story properties can work too, but they're often more difficult because you're paying a premium for a bigger house on the upper unit, but then you're often losing some rent in the basement, and the purchase price is usually still higher. So,
okay. So where areas that we like for long-term rentals, just a quick slide, but there's a better slide next. But we like areas that we subjectively rank C and B neighborhoods. So these are pockets along the north central corridor, right along Center Street, Huntington, Beddington, those areas. Southwood in the south, Ranchlands kind of in the northwest. Just to sum it up, we actually like mature areas rather than newer areas that already have good amenities, decent transit in the area, maybe a future train line coming up, and ideally a neighborhood with not too many basement suites, right? So if you look at Huntington, for example, maybe every 5th house might have a basement suite, right? Whereas, for example, if you look at Cornerstone, there are certain streets with entire streets full of basement suites. So then you're competing with your neighbors when you're trying to re-rent your units, and there's nothing to differentiate your unit from your neighbor's unit, right? So then it ends up being a race to the bottom, especially in a slower rental market. So this is just a Google Maps screenshot, but this is what I was talking about. So we like the north central corridor because these are typically 60s to 70s builds. And they have good price to rent ratios, which is going to help you out when you're trying to work out your cash flow. And we do see good potential for these areas to appreciate as far as price point as well. So there's a good balance of potential future appreciation and cash flow that you can get today. So these are other pockets that we like. Bowness has already seen a lot of price increase in the last few years. But there's still some good pockets of Bowness that you can get decent cash flow today. So is Ranchlands I think it's still a bit undervalued relative to other areas like Edgemont, Arbor Lake, and surrounding areas. Okay. So that's
singled out in there. It's not that they're bad.
Yeah.
It's we circled the ones that tend to work well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other options.
Yeah, obviously there's tons of properties that could cash flow here. There's stuff that property cash flows in Tuscany, Royal Oak. We've got clients who own properties kind of all across the map, but these are kind of the most popular, best value add opportunities for the long run. I guess I have to point it there. Yeah. Okay, so this is a map for the south part of the city. So areas that we see some opportunity that still work pretty well is Ross Carrick, right by Westbrook Mall. And then the Kingsland, Haysboro, Fairview area in the south, kind of by Chinook Mall, Ogden, Riverbend, it's good pockets there. And then Southwood, there's lots of older multifamily there as well, if that's something you're into. Millrise, Shaughnessy, there's some good pockets there where you can get pretty good cash flow, decent price points as well to get in. So, yeah. And again, that's not to say that all these other areas that are not circled are terrible neighborhoods for investment properties or cash flow. It's just way harder to make the numbers work in a vast majority of cases. Okay.
Yeah, essentially in the circled area, it's like most properties that are decent, we can get to that point.
Yeah.
Where outside of these areas, we have to find the needle in the haystack.
Yeah.
cases. Or you have to deal with a different tenant profile in some cases.
Yeah, just to kind of elaborate, if you look at Acadia, for example, a suited detached property might be a really nice turnkey one, might be around the 750, but if you're looking for that same property in, say, Glenbrook, it's going to be closer to like 875, 9. But the rents are not going to be all that different. So then you end up in a position of negative cash flow, right? So what are some ways to increase your cash flow, especially as a long-term rental? And if you buy a property that's not currently cash flowing, say you already own a home, and you're trying to make it cash flow or turn it into a future rental, here's some ways that you can do that. Adding a garage is a popular route that we often recommend. A typical double garage brings in about $400 in additional revenue. So if you don't have a garage in the back, you just have a parking pad, this is a good way to add some extra income. Okay? Typically, we like to offer the garage to the tenants who are renting the home first for an additional fee. And if the tenants refuse or they don't want to pay for additional garage parking, then you could always rent it out to a third party. Right? You can add a basement suite, very popular route, either a basement suite or a laneway home. That being said, if you add a laneway home, the costs are pretty high in today's construction environment. It makes more sense to buy an existing property that already has a garage suite. Furnished rentals is another option, executive rentals. You can always charge extra for pet fees, parking, depending on where you're located, storage fees and all that. And always look back at your financing situation, right? So are you able to extend amortization if you're in a position that's not so favorable? And interest rates, are you coming up for a refi, or can you refi sooner rather than waiting? And reducing expenses. Shop around for insurance rates, use durable products in your rentals. It's gonna minimize wear and tear. On the point of insurance, make sure you do shop around because insurance has substantially gone up in the last year or two. Mainly because of all the natural disasters we've had, like hail, right? And obviously you want to reduce vacancy and your bad debt, so essentially better tenants. So this is a real example. So we wanted to put some real examples so you can see how it works out in the wild. So this is a detached property that one of our clients bought. They paid $585 for it. It's located in Ranchlands in the Northwest. It had a 1-bedroom illegal suite, and the cost to legalize this basement suite is approximately $10,000. We walked through with the client, we kind of looked at what needs to be done, and they just recently purchased this last month, okay? So here I have the as-is numbers. So the main floor rents for about $19. It's pretty nice unit. The basement, being a 1-bed suite, although it has a decent footprint, would rent for about $1,200, okay? We're using a 5% vacancy rate. Vacancies have gone up. So we're accounting for that, and then these are all the expenses. Obviously, insurance is estimated. Property tax for this year, we don't know, but we're using last year's numbers. Obviously,
we know what we're using the current property.
Yeah, current property tax numbers, repair and maintenance, and so on, no condo fees. And we're using 4.5% interest rate with a 20% down over 30 years, so that's what your payment works out to. And in this scenario, as is, this property is actually negative cash flow, $85. So, but how can you improve that number? So expected improvements that this client is going to be doing, he's going to legalize a basement suite. It's going to cost roughly $10K. And he's going to add a double garage in the back. Right now it's just a parking pad. So he's going to add a double garage and rent out the garage to the tenants. So that's going to cost roughly $35K. So expected costs all in, so $585 at $45. You're going to be in for roughly $630. Now there's some holding costs and whatnot, but roughly there. Your expected rent increase is going to be about $400 a month. Okay. Example number 2, this one's a semi-detached that a client bought in Dover.
The other one, because the thing you forgot to mention, the cash flow, instead of being negative, now you're positive 135.
Yes, okay, that's, yeah. I had a 400 here, but I just can't remember now what I had it for. But, yeah, okay. Moving on. So Dover semi-detached. So for those who are familiar with Dover, this property is right across the gas station, the Gas Plus in Dover. Again, bought last month. The client paid $475 for this. This one is a 2-bedroom legal suite, so it was already legal when they purchased. The main floor rents for about $1,850. The basement's getting about $1,200 right now. Again, with the same metrics, 5% vacancy rate and all the various expenses. This one cash flows right off the bat, $395, right? Now, it's a lower price point because it's in Dover. So that's something to consider. So if you're gonna buy in a more, a B neighborhood, something in the middle, this cash flow is probably gonna be more closer to around 200 for a property like this, okay?
You can use this to extrapolate the fourplex as well. Like
Yeah.
It's essentially half of the fourplex.
Yeah, so you just double it. If you bought a fourplex in Dover, roughly you'll get almost 800. So in this case, this only has a parking pad and it's cash flowing 400. If the client wanted to add even more value or increase his cash flow, he could always add a garage for $35K in the back, and that brings the cash flow up to about $630 a month, right? Not that you have to because you're already cash flowing, but it is an option. Okay, so third example, this is a suited detached property in Huntington Hills. This one was purchased, well, it's ongoing right now, it's not a firm sale, but purchased for $629,800.
Yeah, it'll be around 629 because it's a
Yeah.
conditional sale right now.
Yeah, it's a conditional sale, but it'd be around that price. It already has a legal suite. It's in pretty nice condition, up and down. It has a double detached garage, and the rents that you can get for this property are $1,900 up, $1,450 because it's 2-bedroom down.
And it's currently rented for $1,450.
Yeah, so this is
the
a
basement.
current rental income, and the garage is currently also rented for $300. So just use the actual rents, although you can get slightly more for this. So this one, being a detached property, cash flow is a little less, but $224 is still pretty decent in today's price and interest rate environment.
Yep.
Okay, I'll hand it off to Anthony.
Yes, another example, Edgemont. That's another one of our clients. He's taking possession in about a month or so. Well, actually less than a month. It's coming up soon. And I wanted to use this example because it's typically a bit of a more expensive neighborhood, a bit more of a premium area for Edgemont. But you can still find properties that work there. It's not as easy, but there's still some options, and that's one. So in this case, purchase price $675 with a legal suite that has separate heating. So that was a legal suite that was added in as a new suite from an unfinished basement from scratch. So it's a little bit nicer than a suite that's legalized from illegal to legal. It's got a single detached garage and quite a few upgrades as well on this property. There's air conditioning, the windows are super large in the basement, really nice layouts. It's nicer than average for that type of house in the area, right? There's obviously huge houses in Edgemont, but they typically don't work well for cash flow. And this one was still able to get positive $113 a month, and that's using rents that are currently being achieved in the property, and they're recent leases, so we know their market trends as well. One thing I wanted to mention too that Santhosh didn't mention, in our interest rate, we use 4.5%. We feel it's pretty healthy right now. I'm sure Layne can speak to this. We've managed to get some rates a bit below that, but we want to make sure that there's a bit of buffer for someone. So your numbers might be better, could be a bit worse too, depends on your own qualifying, right? But yes, that's another example. Now, what if you can't cash flow the long-term rental that you're going to buy, right? So you're buying a property, you really like the area, you really like the property, it's something you really like about it, but you can't be positive, and for you it's important to have a positive cash flow. There's a few things you can do, right? Like we discussed, furnished rental can increase your cash flow. You can do medium-term rental. Obviously a bit more management involved. You'll have tenants changing more often, but you can get a bit more rent for that too. Short-term rental, depending on the area and the property. You can do Airbnb, you can do VRBO, all these things. You can do a combination of short-term and medium-term. I know some people do medium-term in the low season and then do short-term in the high season. You can do rental by the room, rent to own, right? So there's other options. So we always like to get creative when there's a situation like this and look at what other option might work well for your situation. So rooming house, I actually have an example. This is a property we sold recently. It's currently conditionally sold. So purchase price, again, roughly $900 because we can't disclose exactly, but it's $900 or below. And this one is a real cash cow. So the The buyers did not purchase it to do room rental. They are doing business in it, but we wanted to showcase the example as if you did a room rental. And you can get average, so this property has 14 bedrooms. It's a full duplex, side by side, 7 bedroom on each side. It's 3 bedroom up, 4 bedroom down, and it's quite large. It's 1,250 square feet bi-level. So the basement is almost 1,200 square feet, which is rather unusual for those kind of properties. And that's how they were able to fit 4 good-sized bedroom. Actually, they're all like pretty large. We're rather surprised when we went there. So average between all the bedrooms around $700 a month, $4,900 a month in rental income. Now, I used to own a rooming house, so I know a thing or two about the maintenance required, and I exaggerated the maintenance well beyond my own cost just to kind of show a point. So maintenance is going to be higher. There's no way around it, right? You've got more people living in the property. You've got more wear and tear. That being said, I went in with $1,000 a month of maintenance, right? So $12,000 a year, which in my experience was quite a bit lower than that, but again, just adding some buffer. And utilities were not costing me $1,000 a month, but again, I exaggerated that a little bit. And we're still looking at $2,700 a month of cash flow, right? Now, you could say I'm out to lunch and somehow utilities are going to be $2,000 and repair and maintenance is going to be $1,500, and it still would work, right? There's a lot of buffer there. Now, the real question though is, should you do this? And that's really the big question on the room rental. It's not for everyone. You need to have time. Ideally, you need to live in the property or have a resident manager that lives in property. Currently, one side was used as a room rental, and that's the situation they had. They had one tenant that managed all of the other tenants living in the property. They collected the rent, they did the leasing and everything, so that there was someone living there managing the place. So you really need to ask yourself, do I have the time and do I want to get into something like this? But if you're a new investor, maybe if you don't work and you're doing this full time and you're willing to take over something like this, there's definitely a lot of money to be made. You just need to know what you're getting into and know that you're going to have more maintenance and whatnot. Interestingly, in my own experience, and I've asked other people about this too, the vacancy rate, we still went with 5%, but it's usually a lot lower in these properties because there's not a ton of options for rooms, especially if you keep it clean, safe place. It's rather surprising. The bar is pretty low for room rental. So in my experience, I found that most that were coming over, just because it was clean and there was no major issue with the property, they were pretty much ready to rent right away. So I never really had vacancy, and I've heard that from other investors as well. So that's the room rental example. Next one, short-term rental. This is a friend of mine, so I have exactly her number on her property. It's a cool property. It's a 2,200 square feet townhouse with a basement that's like a bit over 700 square feet. It's almost 3,000 square feet total, which is honestly rare to find for a townhouse. This is in Haysboro, and she purchased this for way cheaper than the price I have there. She bought this for $270,000 in 2019, but I did a scenario as if you bought this today. And that townhouse would be around $600,000. Realistically, you could find something similar in the 500s as well. She is getting, after paying Airbnb fees and all the other stuff, she's getting about $5,000 a month of rent. And that's my mistake. I even left a rental vacancy, which doesn't apply in this case because it's already including her vacancy. So numbers are actually better than this. And then these are the actual expenses that she has. So property tax, actual utilities, actual repair maintenance and whatnot. And she's getting about $800 a month. And again, I left this in, so really it's a bit over $1,000 because that shouldn't be there. Now, you do need to ask yourself as well, do you want to do this? Because short-term rentals are way more work, and they are more of a business than a kind of typical investment where it's a bit more hands-off, right? It requires work. And this unit is doing these numbers because it's in the top of the better unit on Airbnb. It's got kind of really cool feature in the property that make it attractive. It's got like huge round window with like nice furniture and whatnot. So if you're going to do an Airbnb and you're going to be very average and just throw it on there, you're not going to perform well. you need to be in the best listings out there and do a phenomenal job at decoration and making it attractive to tenants. But you can make really good money because this townhouse as a long-term rental would not cash flow 100%, would be fairly significantly cash flow negative if it wasn't from the short-term rental. And then, is cash flow important? So just to kind of wrap this up, we've talked about cash flow the entire presentation, but it's not always the most important thing. So yes, it's important because it keeps you alive, like Layne mentioned earlier, right? That's what keeps you in the game. That's what prevents you from getting in financial trouble. But it's only one piece of the pie of your return on investment. And this pie shows them equal, but in real life, they're usually not equal. Usually cash flow is a smaller part of the pie, and appreciation is usually the biggest piece of the pie, especially in the long term, and because you've got leverage on your investment. So cash flow keeps you on the game. Usually appreciation is what really creates the most increase in your wealth. What we typically recommend for most people, and again, that is very individual on each person's, is start with something that is positive to build a good foundation. That's what we've all done, actually, all three of us. And as you've got a good solid foundation, then you can start to take maybe a bit more risk on properties you think have other potential for appreciation that maybe are negative, because your portfolio as a whole will keep you in the game being positive. And that's all we have for today. Do we have any questions before we wrap up? Yes?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was wondering about the one that had the 14 bedrooms.
Yeah, you can go back to that.
The tenant you had, or that they had, that was kind of the manager, how much are you paying them? Like, are they getting subsidized rent, or like how are they?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. In this specific scenario, what she did is she rented to this tenant and had a lease agreement with this tenant, and then this tenant subleased to all the other tenants. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it can be that you have a lease with every single tenant, but then this tenant gets a discount on rent or potentially even free rent to take care of the property and look after it, right? But there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. She wanted the most hands-off possible option because she's quite busy. It's actually one of the reasons she was selling this property. She just didn't have the time for it. So she went with a lease with this tenant that's taking care of everyone. Yeah.
Oh, so this is not a business. I thought you said there was an actual business.
The buyer is going to be running it, is going
As
to
a
do a
business.
business. Yeah, exactly. So they're not going to do room rental, but it's a great example of what a room rental could be. So that's why we put it out there. And she's been doing room rental. The seller's been doing room rental on the one side. Yeah. Anything else?
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming.